Hey everybody, it's Torean Reaves here. I'm going to be hosting the incredibly talented and super gifted Sin Lagos.
Thank you, Torean. I'm super excited to be here. Oh my gosh, this is like quite the space. I'm so pumped to be accompanied by you two because I got to host you once upon a time.
Yeah, it's super fitting that you're the first person who I get to host because you were the first host that I had on Adobe Live. So this is
Full
super
circle.
cool. Yeah, it's
Full
super
circle
cool.
moment.
So yeah. Why not we just dive right into everything and take me through what you got in mind.
So if y'all have been keeping up, it's been a full day of incredible insiders of Adobe Firefly's workflow, which has been really exciting. For me, particularly, I want to be able to explore the photography perspective. I've been really thinking this through because it's such a peculiar question, right, for photographers to be delving into this space of AI. Such a existential question almost. But I found it really interesting for me to find AI as a tool that I could use for my post-editing workflow. So already I know very intimately my post-editing workflow. I'm already accustomed to it in different ways. But what I want to accomplish here today is learn how we can optimize it with Adobe Firefly tools. Optimize it for speed, optimize it for just the efficiency of it, right? So I'm going to be exploring some images today, some of which have already been post-edited and some that are completely raw. So we can explore the post-editing process. And yeah, we'll explore this existential question.
Yeah, now are these original photos that you've taken?
Yeah, so I've taken all of these photos in different scenarios. It's been super fun to explore. So as you may not know, actually, let me just say a little bit about myself. So my name is Sin Lagos. I am focused on mentoring aspiring artists in the spaces that I've taught myself in. I've taught myself graphic design, photography, and now film, venturing into this world. So photography is a special place for me, and I've ventured quite a lot into different spaces. Hospitality, street photography is my love.
Yeah.
So you'll find a little bit of everything here, some portrait photography. And so what happens when I do that is I often have to reduce my post-processing to something very specific so that I don't get boggled up with like all the different genres of photography that I work with on a regular basis, whether it's for client or just for self-exploration. It's important for me to have some degree of structure just so that I know how to improve on my workflow as cool tech stuff like this pop up, right?
Yeah, we were talking earlier about like setting time limits for ourselves as like creatives. Like, is that something that you've incorporated into your workflow, just like to make sure that you're not, pouring like 8 hours into a certain photo or whatnot?
Yeah, I do try to structure myself even when I go out to do any degree of street photography where I just want to explore a neighborhood. I give myself some parameters, whether it's a shot list or some ideas of what kind of neighborhood I want to capture. And this one you can see here is actually called characters because I was aiming to find different characters during my trip in Italy. And I think that's so interesting that you can just give yourself one parameter and find yourself in a whole world of just like different versions of that one goal. So I got this fella here at his store. It looks like his bodega. And he's holding a drink. It's just his characteristic is I love his hand, just the way he's gesturing, his foot, right? Everything. But then on top of that, the graphic design in me is all like, whoa, look at all of these cool signs. These signs are so awesome. And so they're so telling to the characteristic of the environment in conjunction with the character that I was aiming to photograph here. However, in post-editing, once I enter the editing lab, I often ask myself the question of like, wait, hold on. So how can I improve this photo? Outside of just color correcting, there are two different elements I often think about is correction and then styling, right? So correction and styling. What can I correct in this image to improve it? So already I can see some things here are not absolutely vital to the storytelling within my photo. So for example, I'm looking at these really interesting people
these
here.
fellow photographers.
These fellow photographers.
These fellow artists.
Or videographers.
They're just trying to get theirs too.
For all you know, yes, they're on a mission as well.
They're on a mission as well. You got to applaud it.
But ultimately, it's not adding. It's actually distracting from my original image or my original purpose. So I want to be able to remove this. So I'm going to show you a few of the approaches that I traditionally would have used.
Yeah.
So the lasso tool is one of my favorite things. I know there's this. I'm using the mouse pad here, but I suggest something like a mouse or a tablet would be great. But something about this is cool because it doesn't have to be perfect. I can even add by holding shift to that area. And I've been doing this for a long time. In the past, I would have to be very, very precise to my selection. But in this case, I don't. I actually almost need that level of how would I say, context on the outside area. So I'll show you how I would traditionally approach this. I might do the selection, then right click and go to ContentAware Fill, right? So, and then you can see there, it does a pretty okay job. Let me see if I can go a little bit wider. It does an okay job. I mean, it's nothing, you can sort of tell it's messed with that, that window or balcony. So it's kind of tricky to say, okay, it's not invisible. It's actually pretty discernible that there was some post editing that occurred here. And most of the time, you want to be an editor. You know, as a photographer, you're a curator out there in the street. But once you're an editor, you're really trying to curate the story to its finite points, right? The details really matter. So those details being so clearly visible is not the way to kind of orchestrate this storytelling. You really want to kind of make it feel like natural to the environment. In ContentAware Fill, I don't really get a lot of options either. I would have to kind of try it out a couple of times. And I know this is a tool we've been using, and potentially you can continue to use it too. But in my from my perspective, for complex objects, I rather use Generative Fill. So here we're going to go into Generative Fill, but before that, to set yourself up for success, you can go to Windows and find the contextual bar. And just in case you don't have that there, that is what you're seeing down here, the contextual bar.
Okay.
Yeah, so let's go into Generative Fill. And there's something funny to me about Generative Fill, is that Generative Fill isn't just to fill in areas, it also removes things from the space. Of course, it's going to substitute it with something else, so nomenclature is still there. So I'm just gonna hit generate because I don't need to tell it to do anything particularly. I'm not adding a particular element. It will be able to discern that. This is the magic of the smart AI that is introduced within our Photoshop UI, our program, right? So what I find really cool here for the efficiency of my workflow is that not only do I get a pretty accurate result, but I also get other iterations. So I'm not having to do that over and over, hoping to find something that works for me and having to kind of find something that matches. Instead, I already, right off the bat, I get 3 options.
That's so wild. And like I think before the ContentAware, it didn't capture the lip of like the ledge from the windows above.
Here it is.
Assuming that's a Windows. Yeah, and here it is, which is, you know, one of those details, especially like when I found, at least like when I'm spending like time with the photo, when you have like those little like differences, it can like, it drives me crazy. So to see that like addressed here with the AI is super impressive. And I was meaning to ask you, with ContentAware, especially towards the edge of a photo, have you had much trouble with that? Because sometimes I feel like it's just like it'll give me a tough time.
So it is sort of like a gamble here. Nevertheless, you will find yourself like getting different results. But we are working, like, even though this is at the very start stages, and today we're very lucky because we're just advanced even more so. We are able to have any of these edits that I make today here available for commercial use. So if I wanted to use this, for a client's job, like I can. It's amazing. But even though we're so far into that, there's still a lot of developing happening. So we are just testing it out as we go along. So you will get different results every single time. I do notice that. But you have some things that you can work on. For example, for me, I noticed that if I select a little bit more of the context of the outside area, I'm able to get a better result. So for example, again, discerning what I like to remove, right? So I'm sorry about that. There you go. Okay, so I like to approach my post editing with AI with a rule of the REA, right? So I want to be able to remove, expand, and add. And that gets me thinking about, wait, what do I want to remove? Because this is a photo that potentially I have to question whether it's something that I want to keep as is for journalistic, purposes. However, if I want to use it for commercial use to promote for tourism, for example, I've had those kind of clients, and we want to be able to add elements. There's a certain level of post editing that keeps that in mind. So if I want to remove something that isn't helping my storytelling, or I want to remove something to create more space for commercial use, then I have to think, okay, REA, remove first, right? Expand after, and then add towards the end, right? And that usually helps me mitigating my workflow a little bit better. So for example, this here, it was kind of interesting at first. I was looking at it, I was like, what does it say? It's kind of, am I reading a love letter here? I don't know. But it's mostly not doing much for my scene except creating more of a busier environment. So I rather take this off. So I'm going to just hit generate and start removing some of that there. And of course you can see that on the outside area, I've selected that frame as well to give AI some level of context. It's almost like we briefed AI before we got started. It's like, here you go, this is where we're at. And so again, I get 3 options for that too. Something like this, for example, it says venture, it says something that isn't really relevant. I don't find it to be romantic in the story that I'm telling here. Like this sign is actually really beautiful. There's typography that's being utilized here that I like. I love for somebody in the future to be able to denote, and see and examine. This here, not so much, it's not doing much for me. So I have to have that level of filtering when I'm considering the things I want to remove, especially when it comes to street photography. Am I hurting the image if I'm removing something that is busy and obstructing the storytelling? I don't think so. So that's the way I've been able to discern when I can do something and when I don't want to do something.
Yeah, as a fellow aspiring street photographer, there are times when you go out and like you have here, you can't control for what's in the background. And I've been editing photos before and have realized I inadvertently took a shot of somebody's license plate or somebody's address in the background. It's like, I don't want to, they're already giving me this moment. I don't want to put them on blast by accident, so to speak. So having the ability to remove things like that in a much more expedited way is such a time saver. Yeah,
that's a good point. I used to have to photograph jet planes, and they were so private that we couldn't have that license plate. So I would have to go in there and manually edit each one. And mind you, some of them would be fine, but then some of them have shadows and light conditions that I would have to then discern per edit. Whereas here, every single time I'm using Generative Fill, AI is actually taking into context also the color value, the light sources that are in my image. So even if this image had been post-edited in the with color, it would have been able to discern that part too and added a substitute that makes sense for that image. And I find that to be just very efficient because I don't want to spend too much time with hundreds of photos unless I'm truly, genuinely spending the time to work on a hero shot. I want to really spend a lot of time there. But if I'm trying to output, my time is important, and I find it to be really helpful to be efficient with time. I think that's been one of the main elements we've been talking about.
Especially when working with clients where sometimes, depending on the client you have, they want 20 options just to tell you which one, out of the 20 they want. And it can, the time sink, like you're saying, to invest the time into 20 different photos, knowing that only one will be selected, can be a really tough hurdle to overcome if you're just like a freelancer or a solopreneur. So this is huge.
Yeah, that's a good point. Another point that I wanted to make, which you just reminded me of, is sometimes let's put ourselves in the headspace of we want to use this for tourism, and we want to be able to export for a vertical marketing campaign, which is, we all know, we all participate in our social media storytelling. So oftentimes that is a vertical experience on our vertical phones, right? So I will find that I often shoot in horizontal. So being able to expand that image for these scenarios is really important, but I don't want to have to, remove that spacing or sacrifice some of the elements that I want here. Instead, I'm going to potentially add. So let's expand here this image. And I want to just show you here how traditionally we would have expanded this. We could expand it with transparent default, so we just change the canvas, not so much the image. We could expand it with ContentAware Fill, and we can do that here and just see how, okay, that didn't, ContentAware Fill is not working, so there you go. Let's move on to Generative Expand, right? So if I want to do Generative Expand, it's going to work in the same fashion where it's going to keep in consideration how the environment is at the top and the bottom, depending on how you're changing the sizing. So this gives me more room for me to be able to, I think I did something weird there, but this should be able to give me more room for me to think for different marketing spaces, right? So let me see here.
No, sometimes it's just like when you're shooting horizontal, like I fall so in love with how it's balanced that way that when you go to like crop it to vertical, like sometimes it breaks my heart. So having the ability to do the generative expand is it's so gratifying.
Yeah, it is really gratifying, and I've been kind of experimenting with it too. If you keep up with me on social, you've probably seen this. Experimenting with photos from my archives. So we all remember once upon a time, the demand for ratio, the popular ratio was 1-to-1 ratio, not horizontal, not vertical. So I have a lot of really cool photos that I took in 1-to-1, which is a square. And today I regret it because there is no more information there.
Yeah.
But I can bring it into Photoshop now, completely out of beta, and potentially use it for some degree of commercial use if I want to, and just expand it to a different ratio, horizontal or vertical, for my website, for my marketing efforts, for clients' marketing efforts. I often find myself licensing some of my photos from different locations, and there are moments where you reach a halt because you don't have the right ratio, and there's no way to revisit that location again in that same exact episode or that same exact moment that your client liked. And so either you go and travel to Europe and reshoot, or you can just have AI generate these extra pixels that are not your core element, right? Because my core element is my character in here. It's just the outer bounding area. So of course that's a subjective decision. You have to discern which images you're willing to do that for, especially as a photographer. But if you're working already with your work for commercial use, having that versatility, it's going to be really, really helpful.
Yeah, especially if you're using it, like you said, as like a supplemental additive to older photos. Speaking of your website, I can tell that you're killing it because I've seen in the chat a few comments saying like how beautiful your website is. So please check it out if you haven't already.
Yeah, definitely check out my website. I tried, like I said, I am focused on mentoring aspiring artists in the same way that I felt like I grew as a self-taught creator. So I keep up a lot of resources there for courses and classes and the latest emerging technology like what we have here. And I love exploring how it would work for us. You know, we're so used to certain ways of doing our workflows, but it's okay to evolve, and it had to be a question that I had to ask myself too. But it is okay to evolve, and I think that's going to be helpful down the road. You just have to find how it's going to work for you specifically.
Now, you're being very humble. I heard that you had a major breakthrough with providing resources to kind of guide people's evolution as artists. Do you want to talk a bit more about that?
Oh yeah, so I've been working on Skillshare Courses that have been like working so well.
Congratulations, by the way.
Such a wonderful community there. I love it because we're all trying to learn something, and we're contributing to each other's like path during that process, which is something I didn't really have personally throughout my journey. So I find it really special to be able to be on the other side and providing that level of knowledge and hopefully comfort and like seeing if they're in the right direction, right? But yeah, things like, for example, looking back at my photography, I think about all the techniques that I already know that can help inform me how to create prompts, because prompts is kind of a learning curve. So I made a sort of a very humanistic selection here. You just saw it happen. It was magical. You know, not really. It's not that crazy, but you can just make a regular selection. And in the prompts, I'm gonna actually add a plant here. So when it comes to photography, one of the things I often do when I'm shooting is I'll look at a plant or something in the foreground, so foreground elements to help frame my shot. But maybe I forgot to do that. Maybe I think about that in my editing zone and I'm like, what? I wish I would have done that. So I'm gonna add a plant here, and I can say, actually, I'm gonna be more specific and add a photographic technique, and so add blurred plant, right? So that would be me setting my f-stop, to create that blur effect on my foreground. But instead, I'm gonna be doing it here in post-editing, just informing AI what to do so that we can create this potential new option.
Wow, so you're giving it that
framing.
depth of field.
Yeah, so you get that depth of field as a result. And again, we get 3, but you should know that these are not the last ones you get, right? So if you don't like this one, we could always delete it. You can continue to let the programmers, everybody here on the Adobe team know whether it's a good result, so they continue to evolve. Your opinion really does matter on that regard. But I'm gonna remove that one and keep this one and just hit generate again, and it's gonna give me another result. And it's so cool. It's like, sometimes I find myself, it's almost like being in a casino. You're just like trying to see what result you
play
get.
The slots.
Yeah, I say that, I did it once. But anyways, so like I find myself getting all these different results and then end up with something really, really curious that I didn't even expect to begin with, just from just hitting generate and seeing what else I can do. So you'll notice that up here, by the way, you get tips on how to improve on your workflow process. And from there, I've gotten some really interesting tips, like being able to create the blur effect, to consider how to expand your selection with a bit of feathering could be helpful. And those are tips that are included while you're waiting, which has been really curious, because before I would wait okay, how long is this gonna take? And now I'm like, oh my God, don't go too fast. I'm still reading.
Yeah.
So it's kind of funny. I love that they included that, because I look at anything to find a little nudge of information to just set me apart and help me improve even faster, because this technology is evolving so fast.
That's such a good characteristic to have. I'm such a knucklehead. Like when I play video games, I never read the tutorials. So I once beat Kingdom Hearts, the first one, with the very first weapon loadout, because I never read the tutorial. I didn't know you could change swords. So here I am fighting Xehanort with the original Keyblade. Nobody cares, but I just feel like I'm very envious of people who are patient and learn. And that's such a savvy prompt.
That's a self-taught, experience too.
Yeah.
So it's kind of helpful to have these little things here, to remove content, try generating without a prompt, right? So sometimes we get confused with that. Do we have to save remove? You don't have to save remove, so that's great. But you can see here different elements. So you notice that my order of ops has been to remove, right, expand, and then add elements, and that keeps things in order. So it's not just a shock factor that I created this scene. It's rather I'm being meticulous about what is the purpose of this image. Is it going to go to a commercial space? Where is it headed? Where is it going to be experienced, in a vertical space, in a horizontal space? And this is going to help me make those decisions. Do I want to expand this image at all?
Yeah.
Of course, I always welcome people to experiment, because most of how I found this workflow has been through experimentation.
Just trial and error.
I was shocked.
Yeah.
How will this work for me? I didn't know. Is this me for me? I wasn't really sure,
Yeah.
So it's been a lot of just informing myself on how this works and how I traditionally work, and then finding that merging space. So now I have this image, which is super cool. Completely different result every single time, mind you. This is live, and so you're seeing this result exclusively for you. I don't know if there's any questions on the chat because I'm like not that great at seeing from far, but you can let me know.
Yeah, no, I've seen a few questions regarding the prompts and just different techniques that you've had, or just the rhetoric used within the text prompts. I know for me, that's been, like you said, like a learning curve. Do you have any tips and tricks on more prompt techniques, or what language to put in there? I think like the blurred
Yes.
image to kind of give that depth of field is huge. Like I had no idea that was
I
a
kid
thing.
you not, I keep a list of everything because I find it so important to discern what is it that makes my photography great to begin with. I started experimenting and asking people like, okay, so you show me your favorite photo, right?
Of yours or just in general?
Like your favorite photo. Show me your favorite photo, and then I would ask like, why is it good? Do you know why it's good? Because sometimes we arrive at these like, happy accidents, and we don't really know why the photo is great. But I've had to like meticulously like understand what techniques went into my photo to almost deconstruct it and develop prompts from that alone.
So you're doing like a connotative,
Like reverse.
yeah, like engineering, like your own work. Yeah, that's so smart.
Yeah, so because the part about creating AI generated elements within your photos seems a little bit like, where do I even begin? So I do find it to be helpful to consider those options. Like, what techniques am I already using in post editing that I can consider? Let's open this one up. Consider so that I can generate prompts that are unique to what I already do in post edit and in the production process. Right, so this is almost giving us more room to continue to express ourselves and experiment even after you come to the editing lab. Like, the job isn't done yet, and it's not just about color editing, it's sometimes correcting. So this is a good example of that. Let's rotate it first because I always forget where it goes. Oh, okay, so counterclockwise. Multitasking is tricky, y'all. Okay, so this image, for example, this was a table that has a transparent glass. So then we were experimenting with this, but you can see that I have all of these obstructions, and I can do this in a few ways to attempt to fix it. Like, I can use the stamp tool, grab a source out here and start to clean that out. And mind you, what's so interesting is that we have Generative Fill, we have Generative Expand, but we also have other tools that are powered by AI. So one of my favorites is the Remove tool. I use that so much that I set it up as my top. So when I hit the shortcut J, it goes primarily to that one. So the other ones are here secondary. So I like this tool. You can see there that I've made a selection, but nothing has happened. That is because I removed this remove after each stroke option, right? Or you can select it so each time I make a stroke, it's going to remove an element. So what's interesting about this is that because it's driven by AI, the differentiator is that it has context in mind. So it's able to know what is the surrounding pixels in the same way that Generative Fill does. So you kind of can figure out in which moments you rather use this over Generative Fill. Like, for example, there, I'm like creating these strokes that maybe I don't really have to. That can take a little bit longer, especially if I'm on the go and I'm editing on my laptop like I am right now. I don't like the pad as much, so I don't have my tablet and my pen, my stylus. So, it can be a little bit harder. So you can make a circle and it also will select that subject. It would understand that's what you were trying to do.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have that remove tool option, but of course, it always comes down to my ultimate favorite these days is Generative Fill, because it just knows how to figure out all of these elements all together. So I can go and create a bigger, broader selection. I'm actually going to remove this here.
By the way, your freehand selection skills are actually blowing my mind.
Hard.
You're so good at it with a trackpad. I wish people could see me just sweating angry in my office trying to do this. This is incredible.
I know, that's so funny because this is the thing. You don't have to be so precise. We don't have to use. I used to pride myself in knowing how to use the pen tool so good, so fast. Right at the beginning of my career, the pen tool's still there for other things, other workflows.
Just making me
but
upset.
it's nice to know. It's nice to know that I don't have to rely on a perfect selection. In these moments, I can actually select outer spaces, and I have a 5-pixel feathering on purpose so that it, like, when it makes that selection, it has a little bit of a of blending happening as well. So that's something you might want to consider. There's a bit of an art when it comes to making selections. If I make too broad of a selection or too big of a selection, it might not give me the right result. Like, I see that vignette there. I'm just hitting generate. It's going to remove and substitute. I think that would probably be the better word, substitute those pixels to something more accurate. And so that looks way better, right? So oftentimes I remove vignetting because that is a lens distortion. That's a caveat that comes with certain lenses, right? So I don't want it, and I can choose to remove it in these occasions. So let's remove this here. And by the way, I think I didn't do this earlier, but you could have made all those selections at once and hit generate once. So that is another option. Don't have to make each selection and generate, and each selection and generate. And each time
so cool.
We do have different options here. So let's see, I'm gonna expand this scene because you can see she's a little bit crowded in this ratio. So let's clear this ratio so we can go freeform and maybe go back to our old school 1:1, back in the heyday. I still like it, it still works out for certain things. And I'm gonna expand it even more so because her foot was cut off. And I think sometimes when it comes to hands and feet, it does have like funny results. So we have to kind of bear with it and see how it goes. But this is changing quite rapidly. So I notice even from the beginning, my results are improving in that context, in those spaces. I'm creating like almost a bar that the day that gets like perfect.
Yeah.
Then we have some really cool tools, at our leisure.
Going back to your comment about the like selections as an art, like sometimes like if I select just the hand and ask it to generate it, like if I give it less to focus on, then I'll get a better result with the
More
AI.
precise. Yeah, so that's something to think about. Like, you want to be very precise with your details and how you're removing elements, or you want to expand that selection so you give context. So it's sort of up to you of how you go about it. So now we have a completely different environment. Excuse me. And then you can see that this entire time we are working non-destructively because we have our file here, our original file, right? We expanded our canvas, and each step is recorded along the way, right? All of our different edits are recorded along the way. So if I want to keep some elements, if I decide, maybe some things I wanted to go back a few steps, I still have all of these options. If maybe this option wasn't that great, I can still go to properties, select that, and select a different option. So all of your options are still living there. It's worthy to know that all of this can start to create a bigger file, so that's also important. However, having that control, I think it's also really helpful for me as I'm working and figuring out what I want to accomplish at the end, like especially if I'm experimenting with the environment. So at this point, I like to hit Shift-Command-E to create a version that is completely flat. And I want to be able to make a selection, an object selection here. The object selection is also powered by AI, so it's super smart and it makes such an amazing edit. I envy the generation of today that did not have to go through, I'm gonna age myself, but did not have to go through like having to make these selections that were so difficult.
I wouldn't have survived. I literally can't. I get so upset it's like trying to draw inside the lines. Like I don't have that ability. So
right, you were a color outside the lines.
Oh my gosh, yeah, it was it was wild. My daughter has like these picture books now that like they use like a white marker and it just automatically fills in the lines like perfectly. If I had that as a kid, I would have thought I was Picasso. It's like, oh, I can just scribble anywhere and everything's shaded perfectly. And yeah, I would have needed tools like this to get started. It's
Yeah.
much more.
There's something about this that because it's not the core of like your artwork, it doesn't like hinder your creativity because in general what it's doing is speeding up your process in the parts where you don't have to sacrifice your creativity. This is the part where because you're being slow, you're sacrificing your creativity. So instead, let's speed it up.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to spend my hours trying to make a selection when I could spend my hours actually coming up with a really cool concept, discerning what's my purpose, like, you know, printing these images for my shop. Like there's so many other spaces that now I feel like explore a little bit more freely because I don't have to take into account, oh, well, I have to spend hours on that shot. That project now goes from like an hour to 30-minute execution.
Yeah.
And I could also potentially bill in that headspace. It's like, yes, I can meet your deadline,
Yeah.
right? And those are all the spaces I've been thinking about. And this thing that I'm doing here, I created a selection of my subject and the object, and holding shift, I selected both with a back bracket, this backspace bracket. What is this called? Goes like that. You can see your selection, and I continue to brush in there that selection so there's no random little pixels. Her hair there is fine, it's no biggie, but you can see the selection a little bit better when you do that, right? So I created a mask there, and so now, wait, I'm gonna delete this mask. Did I wanna delete that mask? Here, okay, yes, that's good. So now that I've made that selection, I think that's a pretty good selection. That is the inverse selection, so that's the sky. I can make a request now to generative AI. I really hope that is the opposite. Yeah, I think that's the opposite. Okay, so let's say we could ask for motion, blur, clouds, and let's see what we get.
Your prompt game right now is really blowing my mind. I'm very impressed.
Yeah, I think some ingredients are important. I have this thing where I make food analogies for the process that is our design process. So you do need ingredients like in certain categories. Like what do I do when it comes to photography technique? Okay, blur, motion, got it. I would have done that. What is the object? Clouds. And everything else doesn't matter. I don't have to ask for it to remove, add. I don't have to add those words. They're not necessary. They're fluff. It already understands that you're trying to do that. So we just need really specific nouns and actions that's going to create a different effect.
I'd be writing novels in mine. Oh my goodness. It's so refreshing to see that you're so concise.
Yeah, it's really helpful. Look, sometimes you get some gnarly results. But you can see I'm going to remove that one so it doesn't generate again. I noticed that it keeps that in mind, that I've removed that, so that the next generation is going to be similar, close to the previous one. So this gives me so many different options, right? Like I can start to play with and get creative. And this is a little bit closer to conceptual art and conceptual photography, not journalism or street photography, right? So I'm giving you options here for you to expand your imagination and consider what spaces you want to get really excited about when it comes to Generative Fill and Generative Expand in Photoshop, because there's just so many options. So I've got another image here, and you know what? Her foot came out good. I'm proud of this output. It was great.
No, that's awesome. It's I like really genuinely have fun going through the options like that it presents with you when you do like a text prompt.
I'm not gonna save because I'm not gonna spend time doing that, okay? But I have saved some iteration of this, and we'll talk a little bit more about what happens after we've saved. So let's open one more here and see how we're doing with time, just to be sure.
Yeah, I think we're good so far.
Yeah, okay. So I want to talk about like the selection. There's a bit of an art form to selections. So far we've been using the lasso tool quite a bit to make our selection. This is a drone image that I took here in San Francisco, which is where we are. I'm super happy to be in San Francisco. It always brings me really good memories. So this is a beautiful shot. It's already been post-edited. I already did some color correcting on this image. I wanted to create that vintage, look, because that's what I think about when I see these houses and this architecture. So let's talk about the selection process. Instead of using the lasso tool, I can be very, very specific and make a selection that is based on a shape, right? Like a circle. And I can do, for example, if I draw a circle here and generate something that mimics that shape, like, for example, a moon, it's going to create and blend an object that is in that exact shape and that exact size. Something that I used to do is I would say a big moon, a small moon, but instead what you want to do is make a big selection or a small selection and not say the size at all. So that is going to give you a better sense, like this moon is no good. So for example, if I want to make a tiny space, I don't know, Saturn doesn't come out really good. I'm just going to create the sun, maybe. We'll see. Experimenting. But it's a small selection, so I didn't have to say big sun, small sun. That's going to discern. I can create teeny tiny stars all over the place, right? And that will give me the size exactly to what I've created. So I'll just do stars. So you do think about your selection process. If you're trying to create a building, then a building is shaped in a square rectangle. So you might want to make that kind of selection. If you're trying to make something that is a little bit more freeform, those stars were not visible. They're too tiny. If you want to make something that's a little bit more natural, like plants, for example, then you might want to be able to do something that's a little more natural, like with the lasso tool. So let's remove these here and let me show you another example. I can create a big selection here on this one, and I'm gonna create something like one of my favorite things of Generative Fill, when it was just fun and kind of random for me before I started to really like examine it, was reflections. So I'm going to put reflective orb and see what happens. Right, so it's not going to output something that is square or rectangle because I created a circular selection. So,
wow.
So you can trust that something like this will happen. And if you followed my work, you know that I love mixed mediums. So I do not shy away from creating things that are, surrealistic in combination with my photography. I think of my photography as a foundation for anything else that I can do in the future. So I love that I can just like experiment and find new ways to see. At this moment, it's an experimentation, but down the road, it can actually click with an idea. It can actually click into being a developed concept for a campaign, or maybe a story I'm trying to tell. Maybe I'm talking about the earth, and in some respect, we have this conversation about earth and how we want to take care of it. Maybe I photograph a space that is nature oriented, and we create this orb in the center reflecting that same sentiment. So I just came up with this randomly, but you see, you got to kind of begin at this level of how can I use this tool for my purposes, my current purposes, my current storytelling, and allow room for evolving that workflow. Because if I don't allow room for it, I know we want to be fixated because we're so good at what we do that we want to stick to that workflow, but what if you're missing out on something cool?
Yeah.
That's something I think about.
No, I love that what you said about kind of using your photography as a foundation to express your ideas in mixed mediums. It's really inspiring to see that you get the most out of every frame that you take.
Yeah, and it's super cool to revisit some of my photos that I took a long time ago, and I didn't really have the skill sets or tools that I have today, and kind of merge that past with today's current futuristic tools, which is like amazing and mind-boggling sometimes that they exist in the way that they do.
Don't you love that feeling, like when you go back through your old frames, you're like, oh, like I didn't have a use for this photo then, but now like 5 years
Oh,
removed, like I can like pull
absolutely.
it into the future and use it for something that's really bespoke.
Absolutely. That is often why I end up looking at my archives, because I think about those photos that I didn't really know what to do with them. And I joke that they just collect digital dust in a folder. And then, you know, when it comes to it, it's maybe I didn't have the skill sets or the tools available then to help it evolve away from just being a file, one more file amongst the many files, right? This image, for example, it was an image that at first look, I love blending my graphic design like geometry brain into like things I find in the street. So I'm looking at these shapes, this triangle shape at the top, and I was looking at this red here. So it was something really cool there, but I think in my execution, I didn't really I mean, there was color and shapes, and I like it. But in my execution, I didn't like that her feet are behind there. They're kind of cut off. So I've started to really dislike this element at the end. I wished I only had this and just have it cropped potentially. But now I can do a couple of things to help improve this image for me to actually enjoy it and make it feel like a hero shot. So the first thing I'm going to do is remove this because I no longer like it. It might export something weird because it's red. I'm just, you know, saying it because it's always a little bit strange. Like it sees an element and doesn't immediately know that you want to remove it all the time. So especially something like this, it might output something similar to it. But outside of that, I think most of the time it does a pretty good job at understanding that you want to remove an element. Bravo, thank you for doing me proud. So I still have some elements here that come out in this image and all of the other options. So let's continue to generate. Generative Fill, generate. And it says you can write a prompt in more than 100 different languages.
Girl, you'd be reading those tips. I'm so impressed.
I am. They're like, I don't know what they remind me of, but it's kind of one of those things like when you open a fortune cookie, just like what's going to come out, you know, something obviously relevant to whatever you're doing in that moment. But yeah, over 100 languages. So that is pretty amazing because I remember when it first came out, it was only in English.
Yeah.
So I felt really, really lucky to know English, and I'm bilingual. I know Spanish and English, but I'm super happy that now it's like open to so many people because ultimately that democratizes this tool for any creator out there to play around with it.
Yeah, we were talking before about the beauty of Colombian Photoshop and how I'm going to switch my
God.
language to Spanish.
Yeah.
So I can have a refined, very cool Colombian experience.
Yeah, I have, I'm not Colombian, but I have a lot of fellow friends who are Colombian and they speak Photoshop in Spanish. And I'm always like, wow, this sounds awesome.
Sounds so much cooler.
Sounds so cool. You know, it's so cool to hear it in a different language, like everything you know. So let's see. I'm going to hit, Generative Expand and check that mark. That's another way to just make sure to have it. So that I find it to be really like helpful to have that order of operations. Like every single time I feel a little bit lost in an image, I just remove, I expand, and I add. You feel welcome to break that order. But first, if you want some kind of boundaries and some kind of structure to how you're approaching your workflow and reinventing it and boosting it, then with these tools, then definitely start there. It has been really helpful for me. So I have this. I love her mid-motion movement there. So I'm curious if I can like add some of my reflections. I can use like a circle shape potentially here.
Yeah, I really relate to what you said at the top of this photo, where it's like you had the inclination, like you knew that something was there in this photo, but maybe at the time like you didn't have the space or the skill set or the technique to like really make the most of it then. But like you said, like you can't go back and repeat the moment exactly sometimes. So to be able to use these tools to kind of lift the photo to where you were hoping to get it when you first took it, I think is it's really, really cool.
It is super cool. And if you're wondering, by the way, just going back to like how to get these tools too, is if I see a question here, I have 24.02. I think the latest update is 25. So make sure to have 25. And it's no longer beta, which means it's not going to have, or all of these Adobe Firefly tools are part of our Adobe ecosystem are no longer in beta format. This is the big, amazing thing for us now, because that means we can use it for commercial use. No more watermarks, no weird things. We can actually start to derive a business out of this. And honestly, I was saying just now, we were having a conversation outside about, I don't really believe in the starving artist. I think all of us should have a chance to develop a work that we love, and also develop a nice income from it, because it's fair. We put so much hard work into these things. So having it be commercial use just opens up my brain into like all of these different possibilities for business collaborations and partnerships with clients that I already have. So hooray for that, because
hooray for that,
it's
for real,
not
for real.
it's not a light note at all.
No, it's so important. Like when you're a freelancer, at least I found like the biggest hurdle was scalability. Like you want to have more clients, but you have a finite amount of time. And so have anything that like expedites the process even a little bit, because you're replicating it, ends up having a compounding effect. And so like all the things that you can do in here now that make the workflow faster, pardon me, is I'm thinking of it through the lens of like a solopreneur who, like, I was working 18 hours a day at first, and it just wasn't tenable long term. And so now to have something where it's like, oh, I could have added 3 more clients and saved myself 6 hours per day, that would have been huge. And so
Yes.
yeah, it's really incredible.
If you can walk away with anything today, is definitely how can you introduce these tools, ask yourself this, in whatever medium you're in,
That's so cool.
that is going to help you achieve speed, so that if you're a solo creator, a small business, a freelancer, you're able to have more time for peace of mind, which is so valuable, right? In order for us to keep that fuel going, for you to create more things that you really have been intrigued to create, but you just have them in ideation right now. You have more room for that, right? And 2, how can you create new collaborations and new partnerships? Because now you can, because it's not just a toy to play with. It's actually fun and part of a potential career move that you can improve upon.
Yeah, no, it's very well said.
Yeah, I think this has been. I think we have a minute.
Yeah, I think we're coming to the close of our time here, but I just want to say thank you. Pardon me. This was really, really enlightening, and I love your whole approach and your perspective. Can you share with the audience where to find you, what you're working on now, and anything that excites you?
Okay, y'all. So I really keep up my website for all my fellow artists and my students on Skillshare. I'm focused on visual mentorship, so I've been focusing on creating tutorials on YouTube, courses and classes on Skillshare, and live streams here on Adobe Live. So I'm always listening to your feedback and potential spaces that you're trying to evolve in, because that's always going to help me create concepts for you, for us to explore here live and everywhere else. So I'm super happy to have been here with Adobe and with you.
Oh yeah, no.
It's always fun.
Yeah, we did it. Yeah.
We did it. Thanks everyone on chat.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Good job, y'all.